We're going to take a look at something that gets right to the heart of Ireland. We are talking about Sean-nós, that is, the old style of Irish music and dance. To understand it, you have to look at the tragic history of the country and the beautiful haunting tunes that survived it all. It shows how everyday people held on to their culture against the odds. If you've ever heard traditional Irish music, and if you've wondered why it sounds so completely different to anything else, why the singer seems to bend the notes and put so much feeling into the song, well, you're in the right place. We are going to follow this story all the way back to the medieval days of the old Gaelic chieftains. We're going to look at how the music made it through the brutal years under the Tudors and Cromwell. And later on, we will even cross the Atlantic to meet a legendary doorman in New York City. Finally, we will come right back to the present day to meet the people keeping the old ways alive right now. So let's turn the clock back and start at the beginning. What exactly is Sean-nós singing? Well, it simply means old style. But in practice, it is a complex and beautiful type of traditional singing. It is performed without any backing instruments, and mostly it is sung as Gaeilge, in the Irish language. Sure, you might think a song with no instruments would sound a bit plain, but to be honest with you, wait until you find out what the singer is actually doing with their voice. It will completely stop you in your tracks. When you hear a Sean-nós singer, a couple of things stand out straight away. First off, there are no guitars or fiddles. It is strictly just the human voice. Secondly, the singer does whatever they like with the rhythm. You won't really be tapping your foot to a steady beat. Instead, the song moves to a kind of pulse that matches the natural flow of the poetry. The singer might even hold on to a single phrase for what feels like an age, just to get every bit of feeling out of the words. The real magic happens in how they decorate the song. They use a technique called melisma. That is a fancy word now, but it just means that one singer stretches one syllable out while sliding up and down through different notes. It is the complete opposite of singing where every single syllable gets its own separate note. Because the singer is not tied down to a set tempo by a piano or a band, they have total freedom to play around with the melody. They might add little vocal bends or throw in extra grace notes, changing them up from verse to verse to keep the tune fresh. It makes the whole performance feel deeply personal. Now, how long has this been going on? The exact origins are a bit of a mystery, to be honest. Music experts reckon it's been in a similar shape since at least the 13th century, maybe even earlier. Back in ancient Gaelic Ireland, you see, society was highly structured. The poets, or bards as they were known, were a highly respected bunch. They were seen as proper professionals, completely separate from your everyday musicians. Their main job was to write very strict, complicated poetry for the local chieftains. Before we look at how good old politics changed the music, we need to talk about the keening. That comes from the Irish word cuinú, which simply means to cry or to weep. If you are wondering if the keening is connected to Sean-nós, the answer is an absolute yes. Basically, it is a vocal lament for the dead. You can think of it as a very specific type of Sean-nós singing. For hundreds of years, keening was a massive part of the traditional Irish wake and funeral. In ancient times, a local chieftain would have had his own personal bard sing the funeral song, but in more recent centuries, families would actually hire professional keening women, or the ban cinse, to cry over the body. These women put their whole bodies into the performance. It was highly dramatic to watch. People writing in the 1800s noted how these keeners would rock back and forth while clasping their hands. Sometimes they would suddenly throw their arms up in the air, almost as if they were struck by a flash of inspiration. When they sang, they would talk about the family history of the person who died. They would even mention their good points, and they might even bring up a few of their flaws as well. Mixed in with the lyrics were sounds that didn't have any factual words. They were just pure emotional wails. The crying of the keener was incredibly sad and almost unearthly. In fact, in Irish mythology, this is exactly what the banshee sounds like. The banshee is a supernatural spirit, and her keening was said to warn a household that a family member was about to die. And very interestingly, the image that we perceive of the banshee today is actually taken from the image of these keening women. You can find out an awful lot more about it here in this video that I did a wee while ago. So the next time that you hear anybody saying that they saw or heard a banshee, ask them if any of their neighbours had any keening women over first. Joking aside though, on that note actually, have you or do you know anybody who has seen or heard a banshee? Tell us all about it down in the comments, because I'm sure there'd be some great stories to read about that, especially if you don't live in Ireland, because I'm really curious if the banshee isn't confined to this part of the world. But the keening is deeply tied to the Sean-nós tradition. Both styles are sung completely unaccompanied, ignoring a strict tempo to rely entirely on deep feeling. True funeral keening mostly died out by the middle of the 20th century, but the sorrow of the keening still lives on today in the slow laments of Sean-nós. So, why did the Irish sing in this deeply emotional, unaccompanied way? To make sense of it all, we have to look back at the dark history that shaped this country. Going back to the 1500s, Ireland was a real patchwork. You had the old Gaelic chiefdoms on one side, and the descendants of the Norman conquerors on the other. The Tudor monarchs over in England decided they needed to bring the whole island under their thumb, starting in a big way with Henry VIII. In 1542, Henry declared himself King of Ireland. He set up a policy where Irish lords were forced to hand over their lands and titles to the crown, simply to get them back under English law. Now, you might think that was the end of the matter, a quick bit of paperwork to keep the English king happy. But as you can probably guess, telling an Irish lord he suddenly answers to London didn't go down very well. Instead of fixing things, Henry's plan actually kicked off a massive fight for the future of the whole island. When Oliver Cromwell arrived in the middle of the 17th century, the old Gaelic way of life was completely shattered. Following a Catholic rebellion in 1641, Cromwell landed with his new model army. His campaign was unbelievably ruthless. Modern historians often describe what his forces did as ethnic cleansing. His men burned crops to the ground and deliberately caused mass starvation across the country. On top of that, they carried out horrific massacres. It is reckoned that up to 40% of the Irish population died during this period. People were killed in the battles, but hunger and disease wiped out huge numbers of men, women, and children as well. Cromwell had to pay off his army and the wealthy people who funded the war. To do that, the English Parliament passed a new law in 1652. This basically meant grabbing nearly every inch of Catholic-owned land east of the River Shannon. The native Irish landlords were packed off to the west. They were banished to the harsh, rocky lands of Connacht and left to fend for themselves, to hell or to Connacht. By the close of the 1600s, the old Gaelic upper classes were completely wiped out. So how did this change the music? With the native chieftains stripped of their land and power, the professional bards suddenly lost the wealthy patrons who used to pay them. These once elite poets had to take to the roads. They ended up wandering from place to place, writing what would become known as street poetry, or shráid éigse. The highly complicated poetry they used to perform for royalty had to be watered down. They simplified things into standard song meters called áireann. This meant ordinary folk could easily follow along. As thousands of people were driven out to the west, different regional styles of singing began to blend together. Sean-nós essentially became the music of the people. It functioned as a living oral history. Singers used it to document big events like local rebellions and the terrible famines. It was also a way to process the sheer heartbreak of losing loved ones to the emigration ships. With the country turned completely upside down, musical instruments became a very rare luxury. They were far too expensive for the poor, or in some places, the authorities just banned them completely. This brings us nicely to lilting. Lilting is a way of singing, but rather than using actual words, the singer uses nonsense syllables like diddle-dum, diddle-I or something like that. Now, how is that different from Sean-nós singing? Well, Sean-nós is all about the lyrics, the story, and the feeling, moving to that free-flowing pulse. Lilting, on the other hand, is all about strict rhythm. The whole point of it was to copy the energetic drive of a fiddle or a harp. It was done specifically so people could get up and have a dance. There is an interesting bit of folk legend about this, even if it is a bit hard to prove. People say lilting really took off during the Cromwell years when instruments were outlawed. The locals had to pass down their dance tunes by mouth to keep them going. And that leads us into Sean-nós dancing. Similar to the singing, this is a casual, old-style form of solo Irish dance. It is totally different from the stiff, high-kicking step dancing that you might know from Riverdance. Sean-nós dancing stays low to the ground. It is heavily improvised, and the dancer's arms move around naturally. The dancer wears regular shoes, often hard ones to make a bit of noise, and they will dance on whatever is handy. They might dance on the bare floor or up on a tabletop. You might even see them battering out a rhythm on a barrel or on a door lifted right off its hinges. The main goal is to strike the floor loudly and really emphasize the beat of the music. But which came first, the singing or the dancing? And did people do them both together? The history books don't give us a clear date on which one was invented first, as they both grew naturally out of the same old rural Gaelic culture. But what we do know is that they took place in the exact same settings. You would find them in a local céilí house, with neighbours gathered all around the fire on a cold night. But here is an important point. You wouldn't dance to Sean-nós singing. Instead, Sean-nós dancing went hand in hand with lilting. Because a Sean-nós singer totally ignores a steady beat and stretches out the words, you can't just dance to it. If you wanted to get up and move, there was no band around. You needed a lilter to provide that strict bouncy rhythm. Now, you might be wondering, did the singing influence the way instruments were played later on? You might be thinking, Irish tunes are so full of twists and turns because fiddles and flutes were trying to copy the singers. But interestingly enough, the evidence points the other way around. Sean-nós singers often sing with a very distinct, thin, nasal sound that you don't hear when they're just talking. Music experts reckon this nasal tone started out as a way for the human voice to copy the sound of the uilleann pipes. The famous Sean-nós singer Joe Heaney had a word for this. He called the nasal effect the gnaw. He said this acted like a quiet drone inside his own head, helping him stay perfectly on pitch. To him, it represented the sound of 1,000 Irish pipers playing throughout history. So, rather than the instruments copying the singer was actually trying to channel the ancient drones of the pipes. Most modern singing styles rely on a big, full sound and plenty of vibrato. Sean-nós singers, on the other hand, almost never use it. The magic of the music comes from that unpolished, thin tone. It feels incredibly natural, and the real skill is found in the unbelievably complicated way they decorate the melody. So, who were the masters of this craft? The actual phrase Sean-nós, funnily enough, was only made up recently, back in the 1940s. Sure, when you think of it, why would singers be calling their current present-day way of singing old style? The Gaelic League used it as a way to name and protect this old style from modern pop music, but the singers themselves were carrying on an unbroken chain going back centuries. There is one name that stands above the rest, and that is Joe Heaney. He was born in 1919 in Connemara. That is a rugged, Irish-speaking area out on the west coast. Heaney grew up in a place where fishing and singing were just part of daily life. He actually learned the old keening songs directly from his grandmother, a woman who had lived through the 1800s. The Connemara style of Sean-nós is probably the most famous one today. It is incredibly detailed. Heaney was a master at putting little musical twists onto almost every single word he sang, but making a living from the old songs wasn't easy. Heaney emigrated to Scotland and later went on to America in the 60s. He ended up taking a job as a doorman at an apartment building in New York. As it happens, he was the doorman for the famous TV host Merv Griffin. When Griffin finally realised his doorman was a legend in the Irish music scene, he actually had Heaney on his show. Heaney was a total purist. He sang at the famous 1965 Newport Folk Festival, and this was the very same year Bob Dylan caused uproar by playing an electric guitar. Amidst all that noise, Heaney stood there as a quiet reminder of an older acoustic world. He helped bring songs like The Rocks of Bawn to a wider audience. He called that English language tune the daddy of all Irish Sean-nós songs. It tells the story of trying to farm terrible land while facing the threat of being forced into the British Army. By the end of his days, his legacy was well and truly set in stone. He even picked up a major arts award over in America in the 1980s. But sure, Heaney wasn't the only great singer out there. You had Bess Cronin down in West Cork. She used to sing what they call macaronic songs, which is basically mixing Irish and English words together in the same tune. She inspired a whole wave of folk singers that came after her. Then you had Paddy Tunney. He made a strong case that you could absolutely sing in English and still call it Sean-nós. For him, the language really didn't matter, as long as you kept the old style and decorated the melody properly. And we definitely can't leave out Tomás Connemara. He was a master on the uilleann pipes as well as a lovely singer. He had a famous saying about all of this. He believed you can't truly understand any part of Irish music without appreciating Sean-nós. As he put it, it is the key which opens every lock. But that brings us up to today. You might be wondering if you can still hear Sean-nós out and about, or if it has just become a thing of the past. The truth is a little bit complicated. On the one hand, the old settings for this music are mostly gone. Back in the day, a singer would perform in a local house. They would sit by the open fire, something like that, maybe close their eyes, or face the wall to really concentrate on the story. A neighbour might even hold their hand and give them a bit of support, and this was a lovely role they called the windall, while people in the room shouted out things like Mahu to encourage them along. Nowadays, the noisy pub has replaced the quiet fireside. Sadly, loud ballads with guitars often drown out the quiet beauty of an unaccompanied singer, and because the Irish-speaking areas, the Gaeltachts, have gotten smaller over the years, young folks just aren't picking up the style naturally by sitting at their grandfather's knee. Instead, they're going to organised classes and listening to old recordings to learn the tunes. Some older purists give out about this. They argue that it makes the newer generation sound a bit too polished. They worry the singing is being treated like a technical exam to be passed, rather than focusing on the pure feeling behind the words. It has also been pushed to the sidelines in universities at times, seen by some as an overly difficult type of art. But personally on that note, I feel there's a bit of disconnect. It's very difficult to ask a younger generation to truly empathise and feel the same emotions that somebody may have felt some 50 to 100 years ago. People may give out about it, but I feel it's just a natural course the music is taking. Would you agree with that? But moving on, let's ask a very important question. Is the tradition actually dying out? Sean-nós has proven to be just as tough as the ordinary people who created it in the first place. Modern singers are stepping up and keeping it very much alive. You have brilliant singers like Melanie Cronin from Muskerry, who is celebrated for bringing the old Munster style right into modern day. Seamus and Kiwi Flaherty as well, the brother and sister duo who are deeply rooted in the Sean-nós tradition of Connemara, and thankfully there's been huge effort to save old recordings, thanks to massive digital archiving projects, including collections of Joe Heaney's own singing. This music is now easier to find and listen to than ever before, no matter where you are in the world. So there you have it. Sean-nós goes far beyond a simple style of singing. Really, it is a living, breathing history book of Ireland. It is the kind of music that asks you to strip away all the modern backing tracks and heavy studio production. There is no auto-tune to hide behind here. It simply invites you to sit back and appreciate a single, beautifully decorated human voice telling a story. I hope you enjoyed learning about all of this as much as I enjoyed talking about it. Do tell us your thoughts about it down in the comments. And while you're at it as well, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to keep up to date on future videos. You may have noticed if you've watched these videos before, but I completely chopped out these usual ending bits of the video. I was trying to be more minimalistic with writing the videos, but in doing so I had actually noticed a bit of downshift in engaging with you all in the comments. So I'm going to try and put them back in from now on. Tell me anyway if you have an opinion on it, or if you've even noticed this, which felt better for the videos for you. Your opinion is actually far more important to me, so please do let me know. But real quick before I finish up the video, a quick reminder that there's a few new products on the shop along with a 10% discount till the end of the month. And as well, if you feel like supporting the channel a little bit more than just subscribing, you can join the channel members and I'll give you a shout out on the next video. More details down in the description below anyway. Honestly, without all your support, I wouldn't be able to make these videos, so from the bottom of my heart, a huge thank you to every single one of you. But look, I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, slán go fóill, cheers.